Hey, welcome to ILTA's YouTube video entitled Copilot for Outlook. I'm your moderator, Erik Miller, Innovation Analyst at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister LLP, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by Sharon Weaver, CEO from Smarter Consulting. We're incredibly lucky to have Sharon with us today. She's the founder and CEO of Smarter Consulting, a Microsoft MVP for M365 Copilot teams, a Forbes Next 1000, a Six Sigma Black Belt, and many other things. Sharon, is there anything else you'd like us to know about yourself?
I think that's plenty, but thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, we're happy to have you, and thanks for your time here. I know we're talking Copilot and Outlook today. Before we get really further into like what Copilot and Outlook can do, let's just talk a little bit about what Copilot is so we're all on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. So Microsoft Copilot is an AI-powered assistant. So what that means is it's assisting the applications you already have. So if we think about something like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, Copilot lays on the top of that and basically helps us to be able to use those tools better and in a way that we wouldn't normally be able to do.
Cool. I know it's available not just in Outlook, but in a variety of other Microsoft platforms. Can you rattle off some of the most popular ones?
Yeah, so first and foremost, GitHub, which is probably the most popular. Developers absolutely love having Copilot in GitHub. Power Platform definitely has some Copilot that's built into it. The M365 stack, which is Office. And then basically, as you start to look into the stack, you'll start seeing it kind of be embedded throughout different applications as we move forward.
Cool. I know it runs like all other Gen AIs based off of prompting. Is there anything specific or unique about prompting Copilot versus, let's say, something common like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini?
Yeah, when we think about some of those other tools, they are really open to, you kind of prompting whatever you want. I think that Microsoft's doing a great job of putting some boundaries in place. And it's not that you can't prompt whatever you want, but what they have done is they've prioritized prompts that work. And so when you go to prompt in Copilot, what will happen is it'll pop up and say, hey, here's some prompts that you can use. And there are certain prompts that just won't really do anything because Microsoft knows that you're not going to get a good output out of that.
All right. What are some security basics on Copilot? I mean, it sits in everything that we've got in the Microsoft stack. Anything we need to know about that versus, a public LLM?
Yeah, at a high level, Copilot is really designed to be part of your tool architecture. And so it honors the architecture that's behind it. So if we think about M365, first of all, the boundaries are at your M365 tenant level. So they're not going outside of those boundaries. But once it's inside of the M365 stack, whatever architecture you have in place, it will honor, including policies, permissions, any sort of like sensitivity labels, things like that. Copilot is smart enough to understand all of that stuff. And it's because what happens is all of that information comes out. And then once again, Copilot is at the very front. It's not at the back, it's at the very front. So by the time it makes it to you and then it makes it to Copilot, it should have already gone through all of those filters on its way.
Okay. Licensing structure. Can we just briefly talk about that and how it works for a firm?
Yeah, licensing is actually, most Microsoft stuff is really confusing. Licensing, you kind of have to have a PhD in licensing to even understand what the licensing is. Copilot's been great because it's very simple. Basically, if you want Copilot in the Office stack, for example, so Copilot, M365 Copilot is a flat $30 per month per user, and you pay it annually. And that covers your entire M365 Office 365 experience. Power Platform, so Copilot and Power Platform is embedded within the product, so therefore it's not an additional expense. And some of the other ones, it depends on what you're wanting to do, kind of have their own individual setup. And I know that there's a few things that are kind of changing with features around premium products versus the basic fundamental programs. But the M365 one is the one that is most frequently asked about. And basically, it's that $30 a month that's paid annually. And the only thing to think about beyond that is if you want to use Copilot Studio in addition to that, Copilot Studio is included in the individual license for M365. But if you want to bake your whole tenant for just Copilot Studio makers, then that's like a $200 a month license.
Okay, great. Just to highlight again, I know we talked about a little bit earlier, but the limited prompting availability, that's something we definitely wanted to highlight a second time. You can't go in here and do quite everything you would in a public LLM, which is definitely has some pros and cons depending on it. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, the really nice thing is it's going to tell you when it can't. So it's not going to just ignore you. It's not going to sit there and go, "Oh, I'm confused." It'll say things like, "I'm sorry, I can't do that right now," or I don't know what that means. You'll get little messages back that will tell you when you've kind of hit its boundaries. But what I always recommend to people, and you'll hear me say this all the time, is if it's something you want it to do and it can't do it, just click that little feedback button and make sure Microsoft knows, and they will do their best to add it to their list.
All right. Well, thanks for running over some Copilot basics. I know we've got three different use cases we want to highlight with Copilot and Outlook today. Let's dive into those. I know the first one was summarizing an email thread. Uh, how does this work?
Yeah, so one of the really helpful features, especially for me with Copilot for Outlook, is the ability to summarize these really long email threads. So, for example, and the one that I highlighted here is we've been back and forth on conversations on what should we do and what should we not do, and can you get me this, and what time is that going to happen? And what ends up happening is you get a lot of different conversations that go in and out with different people, and sometimes it's difficult to even remember what people said or what's important. And so this summarize an email thread will go through all of that entire email thread, and it will boil it right up to the top. And what's really great is you just simply click on the email that's associated with that conversation thread, and at the very top you click the little Copilot summary button. And when you do that, you can see in the image that it just gives you some really high level bullet points of here's the important things that I've pulled out of this entire thread, so that now I know what are the things that I need to care about.
Yeah, I mean, I've personally used this and have found it to be incredibly useful, especially if like I'm out of the office for a day and come back and there's, like 11 responses on something or anything like that. Um, have you found like it has been pretty good at returning exactly like the key information you're looking for and not really filling it with a lot of fluff?
Yeah, overall, it does a really nice job. I would say, if anything, it probably gives you less information than it should over more. And I think that's because Microsoft's trying to be very thoughtful about what information it does give you. They would obviously rather undershare than overshare from a security perspective, and from a consuming perspective. You can only take in so much information. And so I think the big thing is that, they're still kind of learning what is the most important and what is the priority information that you need. But I would say 75% of the time, if I use this feature, I get enough to make sure that I know what's going on, and then it's up to me if I want to dig a little bit further.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I can definitely think of, many use cases outside of just myself at our firm that this would be helpful with. Um, moving on, let's talk about our second use case, the one that probably everyone's at least the most familiar of hearing about, but editing and drafting emails with Copilot.
Yeah,
How's that work?
when it comes to the drafting process, Copilot makes this so easy and so intuitive. All you have to do is create a new email. And then what'll happen is you click on that little Copilot prompt, just like what you would in Word, and you tell it what you want the email to be about. And the example that I put in here is, I know a lot of times, you need to ask for, was this a memorandum of agreement or something like that, where like, hey, here's all the information. Can you send me that information back? Or I just want to confirm this information with you. And so all you have to do is grab that prompt. And so you can see I did it real quick, because you can actually store your prompts in OneNote or in Notepad or somewhere that makes sense to you. And then just copy it, throw it in there, add the information that you want, and you can even say who you want it to be sent to. And if it's in the contacts of your Outlook, it'll already know who that is. So you can put that in there, put the name, put the details, it'll give you a draft. So it's not just going to do it without, your acknowledgement. It's going to say, hey, here's a draft. Do you want to change anything? Do you need to look at anything? If you like it, just click keep it. It's still not going to send it to anybody quite yet. It's just going to put that information in the email. And then once you feel good about that, you can edit it a little bit further. You can make sure that you've got the right signature you want. Then you can put the people you want to send it to and go ahead and send it out.
Yeah. I've used this myself to, help draft some emails maybe I'm not exactly sure how to respond to, or even some just rote stuff where it's like, man, I have a response already. We can, I know what we're looking for. How much editing do you think you end up doing on one of these prompts on a general level, we'll say? I know it can vary depending on what you're asking it to do.
I think the prompts that I've used quite often, and this is a thing, we're going to talk about prompts throughout probably this whole
Mhm.
conversation, is that when you first use a prompt, you'll kind of be like, oh, that's the response I get back. And so you'll tweak it quite a bit. But once you figure out what you like the prompt to do for you and you get a good prompt, then I think it's very, very, very minimal. So, for example, if I just start with a random prompt, then I might have to change the tone or the information or make it longer, make it shorter, things like that. But once you've got a good prompt that you feel comfortable with, you can copy, paste, and tweak. And so basically you grab it, you put it in there, and you might have to update a few bullet points, or you might need to, make it a little shorter or something. But for the most part, I would say I do very, very minimal changes after I've thrown a prompt in there and gotten that information back.
All right. Again, this one incredibly useful and definitely saves time. Let's move on and talk about our third use case, and this is the one personally that I'm the most excited about. Um, Summarizing before a meeting. And I'm going to jump in right here and say this is obviously not in Outlook what we're looking at right here. So what are we looking at?
This actually is an Outlook. So
Oh, my bad.
a lot of people don't realize that Copilot not only can be built directly into the specific things you do in Outlook, but in any of the Office apps, if you click on the Copilot symbol, it'll actually open this other screen behind the scenes. And what will happen is you'll be able to use the full functionality of Copilot with other prompts. And this happens in every single application that you have in the Office 365 stack. So in this case, I grabbed Outlook for the web. I clicked on the Copilot symbol, and as you'll notice at the very top, it gave me a couple of recommended prompts because it knows what application I'm in. And so it's like, wait, I think this might be something you're asking for. And what was really great is when I recorded this clip, I was like, well, I could put the prompt in to show people how to summarize meeting, which by the way, you can do in any Copilot thread anywhere. You can just say, summarize this meeting, give it as much information about the meeting as you know. It'll do its best to go find that information and give you a summary. But in this case, because I was in Outlook, it already said, hey, here's a meeting I think you might like to summarize. And I had a meeting that was coming up anyways, which is CollabCon, which is a conference that I run for collaboration tools in December. So it was very timely that it just popped up and said, hey, I think you might need this. So I went ahead and I clicked on the summarize button and I recorded it for this video. So it works out really great because you can just see I clicked on it. It says, hey, here's the details. Here's the agenda. Here's the information you might need to know. Is there anything else you want from me?
Yeah, and even here, it's pulling from other sources, like you said, right? I just wanted to highlight again. It's got Teams messages in here and some files, which maybe you didn't necessarily pass around via Outlook. I've also, used this to help summarize for meetings, and it's fantastic when you're like, hey, what's this meeting about that's happening in 5 minutes? Because I don't remember,
Oh,
right?
every time, every
Yeah,
time.
absolutely. It just pops up, and I'm like, oh, great. Yeah, I mean, those are three use cases, but I know there's more that we want to talk about here about Copilot, because it's not just use cases. There's other things about having your right data put together and some other topics we wanted to highlight. Um, I know this is a fun question and it's going to be a little sticky, but like really, what's the best way to get your Outlook data Copilot ready?
It's the same way when we start talking about retention policies or security policies or sensitivity labels or anything that when we talk about content management is all going to stand up to this. So it's really funny because everybody says, well, what should we be doing to get ready for Copilot? And my answer is, well, if you've been doing the right things for your architecture and governance needs, you're probably going to be perfectly fine. But if you haven't been doing those things, the things that I would highlight specifically for Outlook are things like using labels, using categories, using flags. If you use folders, I'm a big folder person in Outlook still. Anything that essentially gives it any sort of context for Copilot to be able to understand and organize and learn from will make everything a little bit easier for Copilot. And one thing to recognize and one thing to think about is that if you have, for example, an archival or a retention policy within your Exchange or Outlook, maybe it deletes everything only, except for the last 30 days. Copilot is still limited to that information. So, and that's when, like you mentioned earlier, if you've got information in OneNote or Teams, maybe you've archived your emails out into OneNote for easier finding later. Just remember that it's going to honor whatever policies, whatever, retention you have set up. So that's where it's going to be able to get that information from.
Yeah, and specifically wanted to talk about that a little bit more in detail. I know that at least some, maybe a lot of firms will, for instance, use like a third-party vendor to back up their emails versus a Microsoft Exchange. That's at the moment all walled off to Copilot once they're archived out of the Exchange, right?
If out of the box, yes.
Okay.
So if you want to include any of that information, that would be a custom scenario that you would have to look into. But for the M365 Copilot and the way that it's set up for you to be able to use, it is out of the box limited to what is inside of your tenant.
Yeah, connectors is a whole separate conversation.
Correct.
Okay, so we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I know it's something that's been asked and talked about really frequently. Obviously, we're law firms. We have a ton of sensitive data and potentially clients that are saying at the moment, you can't use generative AI on our work. So are there ways that we can wall off data from Copilot in Outlook?
Yes, absolutely. There's a couple of different ways that you can handle it. So you can, like I mentioned, it does honor all the policies and all of the access controls and all of your labeling and all of your retentioning and things like that. So what my recommendation is make sure first and foremost that in something like Purview or in your architecture that all of that content to begin with has some sort of a policy or label process that is in place because then Copilot will honor all of those things. In addition, at the application level, there is the option to be able to identify certain things that the application can or cannot access, and that is only going to mature with time.
All right. Are there any other additional privacy features we should be aware of for Copilot or anything that we should look out for?
For the most part, I would just say to keep up with all of your policies. I was trying to think if there's anything else specific. Copilot does have some role-based access controls. So from a privacy perspective, if you really do need it to be like a very specific role-based permission set, you can do that. And you can set up your own data residency and compliance policies against Copilot as well. So it just goes back to good architecture and making sure that everything is set up the way that you want to, not just flipping Copilot on and hoping that everything works out.
Yeah. All right. Last, we've got a few more questions here. This one is, we've talked about prompting. It's been interwoven in here. It's heavily important with generative AI. Do you have any tips or tricks for prompting in Outlook and Copilot?
Yeah, here's my tips and tricks. So number one, be as specific as possible. So be direct. And I see a lot of people when I talk to them about prompts, they like write these big, gigantic, long, flowy prompts. And it's funny because then I go on shows and I'll be prompting something and they'll be like, that was a really short prompt. And what you really want to do is you want to give it as absolute little information as possible to get the result that you want. Just remember, more is not always better in prompting. Be specific, be very refined, know what it is that you're trying to accomplish. You can use things like keywords. So use action-oriented keywords. So know what it is that you want Copilot to do for you. Things like, I want to summarize this thing. I want to highlight something. I want to prioritize something. So remember, you're telling it what to do, not asking it a question. So tell it to do something and make sure you use that action-oriented keyword to make sure it does it. Make sure that you know what you want it, like how you want something to be said. So for like tone and formality, you can adapt. So if you think it wrote it, but it seems kind of professional, maybe I'd like to make it more casual, or maybe it's casual and I'd like to make it more professional. I'd say study up on what some of those tones and writing styles are, because then you can go through and simply flip it. All you have to do is go, it'll say, do you want to change anything? You can say, make it more casual, make it more professional, make it shorter, make it longer. So think about those different things that you want to change. And then the very last thing is, don't be afraid to experiment. I have been prompting for the last couple of years since the very first minute that I got my hands on this. And I have tons and tons and tons of OneNotes where I basically started experimenting and saying, okay, if I do this, what do I get? If I do this, what do I get? If I do this, what do I get? So experiment a little bit, see what you get out of it, and then just keep refining those prompts until you get exactly what you want.
Well, thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation that we've had. I know I'm going to ask the fun question. I know that we're going to get potentially some news next week from everything, but can you say anything about what's coming for Copilot in Outlook?
Yeah, I have a few updates that probably are new to the audience, but probably still not under NDA for next week. But the most important ones, I think, is that you're going to start seeing, when we talk about prompting, you're going to see something called personalized prompt, which is going to be a really cool feature. And the idea is basically it's going to be able to remember about you, your preferences, and it's going to adapt to you. So we think about some of these tools that have we're training them on us. And Copilot's going to be no different. So it's going to get trained to you so that when you prompt, it's going to start understanding what your style and your tone of prompting is and be able to help you with that. Like you mentioned, you noticed that it pulled stuff in from Teams and OneNote and different places. Well, I'm on a lot of the public preview builds, and I do that on purpose because a lot of times people haven't moved to those yet, or maybe it's not out in general usage yet. And so I do that so you can see some of the neat things that are coming. One of the cool things that's coming is the expanded integration around all of the different Microsoft applications. So to that point, instead of only looking at content in one application, it will see content from multiple applications within the stack. And depending on how it's architected, you might be able to grab stuff from those applications. We did mention connectors earlier, so data that's connected through an integration or an API, or even maybe information from the web if you're allowing Copilot to go out on the web and get information as well. So that expansion and integration is just going to make all the difference. And then the third big one that I would like to bring up that's kind of fun is, I don't know if you know this yet, but there's this old thing that was called Insights that was in Outlook, and that's going to get moved into a new tool in Copilot that's going to help you with task tracking. So you know how people say, hey, Sharon, can you do this? And I get 87 emails that go, hey, Sharon, can you do this one thing? But it's buried all the way down in a whole bunch of other information, maybe in one of those conversation threads. And I'm reading my emails and I just totally miss it. I don't write it down. I forget about it. What's going to happen is basically that is going to get massively improved in Outlook, where you're going to be able to ask Copilot, do I have any outstanding tasks in my email inbox that I may have missed? And it's going to say, yeah, here's some things you might have missed. And it's going to say, so-and-so asked you to do this. So-and-so asked you to do this. Would you like me to create a task from this? And I'll be like, yes, please. And that I just think that the expansion in the task world is going to make all the difference.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I can't wait to see all of those. Wrapping up here, do you have any other last thoughts or comments? Anything you want to take us out on?
I think the big thing that I like to really remind people is that a lot of people are really nervous about using AI. They're very scared of it. They're very concerned about, oversharing and data security. And also, I think it's a new tool. And whenever we have a new tool, people are nervous to learn. They're nervous to say, oh, am I going to have to learn all of this stuff to make this work? And what if I do it wrong? And what if I invest in this and then it doesn't give me what I need? And I'm here to tell you, this has been one of the easiest tools that I've ever had a learning curve for in terms of quickly getting in, using it, and getting a very quick ROI back out of having it. So even if you're just using it a little tiny bit for small things, it can make a big difference in your workday, let alone if you start doing some of the fancy features.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Sharon, for sharing your insights on this this digital education topic. It's really appreciated. For those tuning in, we hope you find this session valuable. Be sure to keep an eye out for more exciting technology solutions content coming your way this quarter. And thank you, and have a great day.